Keanu Reeves walked into the restaurant on a quiet evening, dressed simply as he always did, a dark jacket, worn jeans, and shoes that had seen many days of use. He never liked showing off. He never felt the need to prove who he was. To the world, he was a famous actor, a star who had been in many movies, but to himself he was just Keanu, someone who enjoyed peace, kindness, and the little things in life. That night he only wanted a warm meal in a calm place, nothing more, nothing less. The Duar restaurant he entered was one of the most luxurious places in the city. Its walls were lined with golden frames, chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the tables were filled with people wearing expensive suits and dresses. The air smelled of roasted lamb, fine wine, and buttered bread. Soft music played in the background, and every customer carried themselves like they belonged to an exclusive world. As Keanu stepped inside, the doorman gave him a long look, almost suspicious, but allowed him to pass. The moment Keanu crossed the entrance, several eyes turned toward him. It wasn't that they recognized him, it was the opposite. They didn't know who he was, and because of his plain clothes, they judged him as someone out of place. A few whispered, some raised their brows, and others ignored him completely. Keanu walked calmly to the front desk where the staff usually greeted guests. He smiled politely, waiting to be seated. But the waiter who stood there glanced at him quickly, his eyes narrowing with disapproval. To the waiter, Keanu looked like a man who could not afford the cheapest meal on the menu. His jacket was not branded. His hair looked ordinary, and he carried no air of wealth or importance. "Can I help you?" the waiter asked in a sharp tone. His voice carried the kind of coldness that made others turn their heads. Keanu, unfazed, simply nodded. "Yes, I'd like a table, please," he replied in a soft voice. The waiter's lips curled into a smirk as he looked him up and down. To him, this stranger didn't belong among the polished glasses and fine plates of the restaurant. Instead of welcoming him with the same grace he showed other guests, the waiter hesitated. He leaned slightly forward and said, "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is not a cafe down the street." His words were laced with mockery. Several diners close to the entrance heard this and chuckled quietly. One woman covered her smile behind a glass of wine. Another man shook his head, amused. Keanu only smiled politely and repeated, "Yes, I'm in the right place. I'd like a table, thank you." There was no anger in his voice, no sign of irritation. It was as though the rude words rolled off him like water. The waiter, however, took this calmness as weakness. Instead of showing respect, he decided to test him further. He picked up a menu and tapped it against the counter. "The cheapest dish here is more than what you're wearing," he said under his breath, thinking he was clever. Again, Keanu didn't react. He simply waited with the patience of a man who had seen far worse things in life. The waiter sighed dramatically and gestured toward a small table near the kitchen door. It was the worst spot in the entire place, far from the glowing chandeliers and close to the noise of clattering pans. Other waiters glanced in surprise, wondering why their colleague would seat someone there. But no one spoke up. After all, the man he insulted looked like nobody important. As Keanu sat down, some customers kept staring, trying to figure him out. His face seemed familiar to a few, but they dismissed the thought. Why would a Hollywood star eat here without bodyguards, without designer clothes, without being announced? They convinced themselves he was just another regular man. The waiter returned to the front desk, feeling proud of himself. He thought he had put the stranger in his place. He whispered to another server, "Look at him, sitting there like he belongs. I'll be surprised if he even orders anything." His colleague frowned but stayed silent. Meanwhile, Keanu sat comfortably, resting his hands on the table. He looked around at the glowing chandeliers, the polished silverware, the busy staff rushing from table to table. For him, this was just another evening. But for the waiter, it was the start of a lesson he would never forget. Keanu picked up the menu and began reading it with genuine interest. Not the slightest sign of embarrassment on his face. His calmness contrasted with the whispers around him. People judged him silently, their eyes measuring his worth by his clothes, his shoes, his simple manners. But Keanu had learned long ago that true value was not in appearances, and he was about to prove it in a way no one expected. That night, the stage was set. The waiter believed he had embarrassed a poor man. The diners believed they had witnessed a moment of superiority. But in reality, they were all about to see humility, patience, and quiet power come together in the form of a man they thought was ordinary, but who was, in truth, extraordinary. The waiter walked toward Keanu's table with slow steps, his face carrying a smirk that showed he had already judged the man sitting there. In his mind, he had already decided Keanu was out of place, someone unworthy of the fine dishes and expensive drinks served inside this grand restaurant. He placed the menu down with a loud thud, making sure people around could hear. His voice was sharp when he said, "Here's the menu, but I doubt you'll find anything cheap enough for you." The words were meant as a joke, but they were not funny. They were cruel. A few diners nearby raised their heads, some smiling. At the waiter's arrogance, they looked at Keanu as if he were a fool who dared to step into a place he didn't belong. One man in a tuxedo leaned back in his chair, whispering to his date, "Why do they let people like him inside? He's lowering the standard of this place." The woman laughed softly but not kindly. Their laughter was like poison in the air, but Keanu didn't let it touch him. Keanu picked up the menu with calm hands, his eyes scanning the dishes. The waiter stood with his arms crossed, impatient, tapping his foot as if Keanu was wasting his time. "Do you even understand what's written on that menu?" The waiter sneered. His tone was loud enough to carry to the nearby tables, causing another round of chuckles. Keanu simply nodded and said, "Yes, I do." His voice was steady, soft, but it carried weight. Instead of backing down, the waiter pressed on. "Well, let me save you the trouble, sir. The cheapest appetizer here costs more than you probably make in a week." His words were sharp, but Keanu just smiled. His patience was like a shield, strong and unbreakable. The waiter tilted his head, annoyed that his insults didn't get the reaction he expected. At another table, a young couple noticed the scene. The woman whispered, "He looks familiar, doesn't he?" Her partner shrugged. "Maybe, but if he were someone important, the staff wouldn't treat him like this." They turned back to their food, convinced that the man sitting so calmly was nobody special. Keanu finally closed the menu and looked up at the waiter. "I'll take the chef's special, please," he said. His tone was polite, his eyes steady. The waiter raised his brows in mock surprise. "The chef's special?" he repeated, then laughed under his breath. "That's one of the most expensive items on the menu. Are you sure you can afford it?" His words were dripping with disbelief. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. "Yes, I'm sure," he said kindly. The waiter rolled his eyes and scribbled something down on his pad. He muttered, "Don't say I didn't warn you," before walking away with exaggerated steps, making sure everyone saw how he looked down on the guest around the room. Small whispers spread. "Did you hear that? He ordered the special. How's he going to pay for it? Maybe he's just trying to impress someone." But Keanu sat silently, his hands folded on the table, his posture calm. To anyone watching closely, his silence was not weakness. It was strength. Minutes passed, and the waiter returned with a glass of water. He placed it carelessly on the table, causing it to spill slightly onto the clean cloth. "Oops," he said with a smirk, but it was clear he had done it on purpose. Keanu picked up a napkin and dabbed at the spill without a word. His calmness was starting to unsettle some of the other staff. One young waitress whispered to another, "Why is he letting himself be treated like that? He's so calm." The other shrugged. "Maybe he's used to it." The waiter, however, didn't stop. He leaned over the table and said in a low voice, "If you can't pay, don't think you can walk out of here. We don't serve freeloaders." His eyes were cold, filled with arrogance. Keanu looked at him, still with that same polite smile, and said, "Don't worry, I always pay my way." The words were simple, but they carried a strange weight. The waiter didn't understand why his insults felt like stones falling into a quiet pond, ripples spreading outward instead of shattering the surface. He walked away, annoyed that his target wouldn't react the way he wanted. Other diners continued their meals, some amused, some uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. They all believed the waiter was in control. They all believed the stranger in the plain jacket was powerless. But they were wrong. Soon they would see that appearances meant nothing, and that arrogance always leads to regret. As Keanu sat waiting for his food, he didn't seem bothered at all. He took a sip of water, adjusted his jacket, and looked around the restaurant with quiet interest. The chandeliers sparkled above. The silverware gleamed, and yet none of it seemed to matter to him. He was not here to show off wealth or status. He was here to enjoy a meal. And though the waiter didn't know it yet, the man he mocked owned every light, every table, every dish in this place. That truth hung in the air like a hidden storm, silent but powerful, waiting for the right moment to break. And as the waiter strutted around with pride, he had no idea that the person he insulted so carelessly would soon change his life forever. The food had not yet arrived, but the waiter kept returning to Keanu's table, each time with a sharper tongue. He seemed to take pleasure in making jokes that only he found funny. When he passed by, he made comments under his breath, loud enough for others to hear. Maybe he thought this was a soup kitchen, he muttered once. A couple at the next table chuckled, thinking it was harmless fun, but others began to feel uncomfortable. Some diners shifted in their seats, whispering to one another, yet no one dared to step in. Keanu sat calmly, his hands folded on the table. His posture was straight, his eyes calm. His silence spoke louder than words. The more the waiter insulted him, the more dignified he seemed. But the waiter could not understand this. He believed that if a person didn't fight back, it meant they were weak, so he pushed harder. When he finally brought the first dish, he placed it roughly on the table. The plate clattered against the surface, the soup nearly spilling over the edge. "Careful," he said sarcastically. "We wouldn't want you to burn those cheap clothes." His tone was sharp, filled with cruelty. Some diners gasped quietly, but Keanu only gave a soft nod and said, "Thank you." That single word, spoken so kindly, unsettled the waiter. He had expected anger, maybe even shouting. But instead, he received gratitude. And somehow that cut deeper than any insult could. It was as if Keanu's calmness was a mirror, showing the waiter the ugliness of his own behavior. Yet the waiter ignored the feeling, choosing pride over humility. As Keanu lifted his spoon and began to eat, the waiter stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him. "You know," he said loudly, making sure others could hear. "Most people who come here know how to eat with class. Try not to embarrass yourself." A man at a nearby table laughed, shaking his head. Keanu, however, simply continued eating with quiet dignity. A group of younger diners at the far side of the restaurant started paying attention. One of them whispered, "He looks so familiar, doesn't he? Like I've seen him in a movie or something." Another shook his head. "No way, if he were a celebrity, he wouldn't let a waiter treat him like that." They laughed, dismissing the thought. The waiter walked away for a moment, only to return. With a tray of bread, he placed it on the table, but instead of offering it politely, he shoved it forward, causing crumbs to scatter. "Eat up," he sneered. "You'll need it if you can't pay later." His arrogance was clear, his cruelty almost childish. Keanu looked at the bread, then back at the waiter. His calm eyes met the waiter's sharp ones, and for a moment, the waiter felt something strange. It was as if the man he mocked was not weak at all, but strong. So strong that insults could not touch him. The waiter quickly looked away, covering his unease with another laugh. Across the room, a family dining quietly had been watching the scene unfold. The mother leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "It's not right. The way he's treating that man, why doesn't someone stop him?" The husband sighed. "Because everyone here is afraid to be embarrassed. They think he's just a poor man who doesn't belong." The mother shook her head, her eyes filled with sympathy as she glanced back at Keanu. Minutes passed, and the waiter's taunts continued. He spilled a few drops of water near Keanu's plate, pretending it was an accident. He spoke in a mocking tone. "Don't worry, sir, we'll just add it to your bill if you can even pay one." A few people laughed, again, but this time the laughter was quieter. A sense of unease was spreading. Keanu, as always, did not react. He wiped the water with a napkin, smiled faintly, and returned to his meal. His patience was endless, his kindness steady. It was almost as if he knew that time itself would reveal the truth. The waiter, however, believed he had won. He believed he had humiliated the stranger enough to satisfy his pride. But deep inside, some diners began to doubt their own judgment. One man whispered to his wife, "Something's off. He's too calm, too composed. He doesn't look like someone who's out of place. He looks like someone who knows exactly what he's doing." The wife nodded slowly, beginning to feel the same. The waiter, however, remained blind to it all. His arrogance made him confident that he was in control. He strutted around the restaurant, whispering jokes to other staff members, laughing at his own cruelty. He didn't realize that every word he spoke, every insult he threw, was weaving a trap around himself. Keanu finished his soup quietly and placed the spoon down with care. His movements were smooth, graceful even. There was no sign of anger, no hint of frustration. Instead, there was only patience. Only a quiet strength that seemed to grow with every insult thrown his way, and though the waiter thought he had humiliated a simple man, the truth was the opposite. With every cruel word, he was humiliating himself, and though he didn't know it yet, the moment of truth was drawing closer. Soon, everyone in the room would see who Keanu truly was, and the laughter would turn to silence, the mockery to shame. That night, the restaurant wasn't just serving food, it was serving a lesson, one that the waiter would never forget. The man he thought was ordinary was about to reveal himself as extraordinary, and the calm silence that surrounded Keanu was the calm before a storm that would change the entire room. The waiter thought he had full control of the night. He believed the stranger sitting quietly at the corner table was nothing more than a fool. He strutted around with arrogance, laughing with himself, dropping small insults whenever he passed by. He had no idea that the man he mocked was not just another guest but the very owner of the restaurant. Keanu continued eating with patience, his movements calm, his face unreadable. He never raised his voice, never argued, never once looked angry. To many people watching, his calmness seemed strange, but to those who paid close attention, it carried a quiet power. A man who could smile under such treatment was not ordinary. He was someone with deep strength. Near the bar, the restaurant manager had just walked in. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a neat suit. He liked to keep an eye on the place, making sure everything was perfect. As he scanned the tables, his gaze froze. There, in the corner, sat a man he recognized immediately. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that face. Keanu Reeves, the man who owned this very restaurant. For a moment, the manager thought he was dreaming. Why would Keanu, the owner, sit quietly in the worst seat in the room, dressed so simply, with no announcement of his arrival, no special attention? Then, his eyes shifted to the waiter, who was standing beside Keanu's table with that cruel smirk, and the manager's stomach dropped. He realized the horrible mistake unfolding before his eyes. The manager's instinct was to rush forward, to correct everything, to scold the waiter and apologize to Keanu immediately. But as he stepped closer, Keanu raised his hand slightly, a gentle signal to stop. His eyes met the manager's, calm but firm. The message was clear. Don't interfere. Not yet. Keanu wanted to see where this was going. He wanted to let the waiter reveal his true character without anyone protecting him. The manager froze in place, torn between duty and obedience. He respected Keanu deeply and knew his wishes must be followed. So he stepped back quietly, his hands trembling. He whispered to another senior staff member, "Do not approach that table. Not a word. Mr. Reeves has chosen to handle this himself." The staff member's eyes widened in shock but nodded, understanding the weight of the situation. Meanwhile, the waiter returned with another dish. He placed it down on Keanu's table with deliberate carelessness, letting the plate slide, dangerously close to the edge. "Careful, wouldn't want you to drop it. We don't replace broken dishes here," he sneered. A few people laughed nervously, but the sound felt hollow now. Some diners had started noticing the manager's strange behavior, the way he seemed tense, the way he kept glancing at Keanu. Keanu gave his usual soft smile and simply said, "Thank you." His voice was so calm it made the waiter pause for a second, but then pride pushed him forward again. He turned away, confident he had won. At another table, an older gentleman whispered to his wife, "Do you notice something strange? That man doesn't react at all, and the manager, he looks nervous. Why?" The wife nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe he's someone important," she guessed. The seed of curiosity had been planted among the diners, and whispers began to spread quietly from table to table. The manager stood at the side, his mind racing. He wanted to protect Keanu's dignity, but Keanu's calm signal stopped him every time. This was not about protection. This was about teaching. Keanu was letting the waiter's arrogance unfold naturally, so that when the truth came out, the lesson would be unforgettable. The waiter, blind to everything around him, continued his behavior. He leaned toward Keanu and said loudly, "This is the finest dish here. I hope you at least know how to use a knife and fork properly." His tone dripped with mockery. A few customers frowned now, realizing the cruelty had gone too far, but Keanu still showed no anger, only patience. This diluant room's energy shifted slowly. The more the waiter mocked, the more people began to side with the calm man in the corner. Something about his steady smile, his quiet dignity, made people feel uneasy about laughing at him anymore. Even those who had chuckled earlier now avoided the waiter's eyes, ashamed of themselves. The night moved forward, and the restaurant was alive with soft music and laughter from the wealthy guests. But at one corner table, the air was tense. The waiter who had mocked Keanu since the beginning refused to stop. He thought he was clever. He thought he had put the quiet stranger in his place, and with every insult his confidence grew. Keanu remained calm, his expression gentle, his movements graceful. He never once raised his voice or gave the waiter what he wanted. He ate slowly, quietly, as though the rude service didn't matter to him at all. His calmness only confused some of the other staff who watched from a distance. They whispered among themselves, "Why doesn't he complain? Why is he letting himself be treated this way?" But Keanu knew what he was doing. He wanted to see how far the waiter would go. The waiter returned with the main course, balancing the plate on one hand. He approached Keanu's table with exaggerated steps, pretending to be a performer. As he placed the plate down, he tilted it slightly, letting some of the sauce spill onto the tablecloth. "Oops," he said with fake innocence. "Maybe you should lick it off. That might be the only meal you can afford." His laugh was sharp, cruel, and it echoed across nearby tables. This time the laughter from the diners was weaker. Some people turned their heads away, no longer entertained. A few even looked at the waiter with disgust. They had started to realize his arrogance was too much, but Keanu just picked up a napkin, wiped the spill gently, and said, "Thank you." His voice was calm, warm, and full of patience. That simple kindness in the face of cruelty made the waiter's smirk falter for a brief moment. The manager, still standing at the side, watched the scene with clenched fists. He wanted to step in, to put an end to this humiliation, but Keanu's earlier signal held him back. Keanu's eyes had spoken clearly. This was a lesson, one the waiter had to learn by himself. So the manager waited, silent, his heart pounding. The waiter, annoyed that his jokes were no longer drawing laughter, decided to push harder. He came back with the cutlery and deliberately set down a fork with a bent prong. "There you go, sir, the best we have for guests like you," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Some diners gasped softly, shocked at the open disrespect. A young woman whispered to her friend, "This is too much. He's being cruel, not funny." Keanu looked at the bent fork, then at the waiter. His eyes were steady, almost kind. "This will do," he said softly, and began eating without complaint. The waiter felt a chill crawl up his spine. He didn't understand it. Why didn't this man break? Why didn't he fight back? The more Keanu stayed calm, the more the waiter grew desperate to embarrass him. He spilled a little water near his chair and muttered, "Careful, don't slip. This isn't a place for clumsy people." He brought bread that was slightly burnt and placed it in front of him with a mocking grin. "Just for you, sir, a special treat." The cruelty seemed endless, yet Keanu accepted everything with the same quiet dignity. By now, the diners were divided. Some still thought Keanu was just a poor man out of place, but others had started to feel shame for laughing earlier. They noticed the kindness in his eyes, the patience in his smile, and they began to wonder who he really was. Why did the manager keep watching him with such nervous respect? Why did the staff seem uneasy? Something wasn't adding up. The waiter, blinded by his own arrogance, didn't notice the change in the room. He believed he was still the one in control. He strutted around, whispering jokes about Keanu to other staff. But some of them didn't laugh anymore. Instead, they lowered their heads, avoiding his eyes. They knew he had gone too far. Keanu finished his meal slowly, placing the fork down with care. He dabbed his mouth with the napkin and looked around the room quietly. His calm gaze met the eyes of a few diners. and they quickly looked away, ashamed. The silence that followed was heavy, as though the room itself was waiting for something to happen. The waiter walked over one last time, determined to have the final word. He leaned close and whispered harshly, "When the bill comes, don't think you can run. If you can't pay, you'll be thrown out in front of everyone." His words were sharp, meant to cut deep. But Keanu only smiled gently and said, "Don't worry, I'll pay." His calm reply carried a weight the waiter couldn't understand. The arrogance of the waiter had reached its peak, and still Keanu did not bend. His patience was like stone, unshakable. His kindness was like water flowing endlessly. And in that moment, many people in the restaurant began to realize something powerful. The man they thought was weak was not weak at all. He was stronger than anyone in that room. The truth was close now, like a storm waiting behind the clouds. The waiter had dug his own grave with every insult, every cruel word. Soon, the calm man he mocked would rise, and when he did, the entire restaurant would witness the shocking truth. And when that moment came, the laughter would stop, the whispers would fade, and the lesson would be carved into the waiter's memory forever. True strength is not in cruelty or arrogance, it is in patience, humility, and kindness. The kind of strength Keanu showed quietly with every smile, every nod, every word. That night was no longer about food or service. It had become something bigger. It had become a test of character. And though the waiter thought he was the one testing the stranger, in truth it was Keanu who was testing everyone, waiting for the right moment to reveal who he really was. The meal had finally come to an end. Keanu had eaten quietly, without a single complaint, while the waiter had spent the entire evening trying to make him look small. The room was heavy. With tension, many diners had grown silent. Some pushed their plates aside, no longer interested in food but curious about the man in the corner who never lost his calm. Keanu placed his napkin gently on the table. His movements were slow, deliberate. His calm eyes looked around the restaurant, catching the stares of people who quickly looked away. The waiter stood near the bar, whispering to another server, laughing loudly. His words carried across the room. "Let's see what happens when the bill arrives. I bet he can't even pay half." His arrogance filled the air. The manager stood at the side, sweating. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew the truth. He knew who was sitting at that corner table. But Keanu's earlier signal had been clear. Let it continue. Let the waiter show his true colors. The manager clenched his fists, waiting, praying that the moment would soon come. Finally, Keanu stood up from his chair. The waiter's face turned pale. His smirk vanished completely, replaced by fear. His body trembled. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. Sir, I didn't know, I didn't mean..." But the words stuck in his throat. The truth was too heavy. His arrogance had led him straight into humiliation. Meanwhile, the diners erupted into applause. The sound grew louder, clapping hands echoing against the high walls. They weren't just clapping for Keanu's fame. They were clapping for his patience, his humility, his dignity. A man of such status had endured insult after insult, and instead of anger, he revealed himself with grace. The contrast between him and the waiter was clear as day. Keanu raised his hand gently, and the applause softened. He didn't look at the waiter with anger. His eyes were calm, almost kind, but there was a firmness in his voice as he said, "Respect is free. It costs nothing. Yet tonight, I saw how easily it can be denied to someone who looks ordinary." His words pierced the air, each one striking deeper than any insult. The waiter swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his face. He bowed his head, unable to meet Keanu's gaze. He wanted to disappear, to run away, but he couldn't move. His arrogance had been shattered, and in its place was shame. The manager stepped forward now, his voice shaking. "Mr. Reeves, please forgive us. I will take care of this immediately." But Keanu raised his hand again, stopping him. His calm smile returned. "There is no need for anger. The lesson has already been given." His tone was soft but powerful. Every diner sat in stunned silence. The man they thought was powerless had turned out to be the most powerful person in the room. and he didn't need to raise his voice or show his wealth. To prove it, his patience, his kindness, and his quiet strength had spoken louder than anything else. The waiter finally whispered, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." His voice cracked with regret. He knew his life had changed forever in that moment, and Keanu simply nodded. "Apologies matter when they are followed by change," he said gently. Then he turned back to the room, his presence filling every corner. That night, the restaurant wasn't just a place for food. It became a lesson, a story of arrogance, humility, and truth, and every person who witnessed it would carry that memory with them. The night when a humble man revealed himself to be extraordinary, and in doing so, changed the meaning of respect forever. The waiter stood frozen, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had spent the entire evening mocking the quiet man in the corner, and now he realized the terrible truth. The man he had called poor, the man he had insulted in front of everyone, was not only a world-famous actor, but also the owner of the very restaurant he worked in. His knees felt weak, his chest tight. He wanted to hide, but all eyes in the restaurant were on him. The diners stared in silence. Some whispered to each other, some shook their heads, others looked at the waiter with clear disgust. They had watched him act arrogant for hours, and now they saw him crumble like paper. One woman muttered, "How could he treat him like that?" Another man whispered, "He's finished, his career here is over." The room that once laughed at his cruel jokes now turned against him. Keanu, however, stood calm in the middle of it all, his posture steady, his voice soft. He looked at the waiter not with anger, but with something deeper, disappointment, that made the waiter's shame even heavier. If Keanu had yelled or insulted him back, maybe he could have defended himself, but this calm kindness stripped him of every excuse. The waiter's mouth opened, but no words came out. At last he stammered, "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was you." His voice cracked. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He looked like a child caught doing something unforgivable. But Keanu's calm eyes met his, and he said gently, "You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to know I was a person, and every person deserves respect." The words struck the waiter like a blow. He lowered his head, his lips trembling. Around the room, some diners nodded, their eyes wide. They realized the truth in Keanu's words. How often do people judge others by clothes, by wealth, by appearance, forgetting that every human being deserves kindness? The waiter fell silent, shame burning in his chest. He tried again, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have treated you that way, I was wrong." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. The room stayed silent, everyone waiting for Keanu's response. Keanu let the silence stretch for a moment. His eyes moved across the restaurant, meeting the stares of the guests. Finally, he spoke, his voice clear. "Apologies mean nothing if we don't change our actions. Respect must be given to everyone, not just those we recognize, not just those who look wealthy, but everyone." His words were soft, but they carried power. The restaurant felt smaller, quieter, as if his voice filled every corner. The waiter's legs trembled, his pride had shattered, replaced with regret so deep it hurt. He remembered every cruel word, every laugh, every insult he had thrown that night, and now they came back to him like echoes. He wished he could take them back, but it was too late. Everyone had seen, everyone had heard. The diners began to clap again, but this time it was not just for Keanu's identity. It was for his wisdom, his kindness, his ability to turn an insult into a lesson. The sound of applause grew louder, filling the room. The waiter stood in the middle of it all, his face red, his head down. He couldn't look anyone in the eyes. Keanu raised his hand slightly and the clapping softened. He didn't want the night to be about humiliation. He wanted it to be about learning. He looked at the waiter again and said, "You have a choice now. You can let this moment destroy you, or you can let it change you. The world doesn't need more cruelty. It needs more kindness." The waiter's throat tightened. His eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. In his chest, he felt the weight of his mistakes, but also a spark of hope. Maybe this humiliation could become a turning point. Maybe he could change. Around the restaurant, the guests watched with respect. They saw a man of great power not using his position to punish but to teach. They saw patience, humility, and forgiveness. It was something rare, something unforgettable. The diners knew they would carry this story with them forever. The waiter finally managed to whisper, "Thank you for not firing me. Thank you for giving me a chance." His voice broke as he spoke. He knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but Keanu's kindness gave him one last opportunity. Keanu gave a small nod and said, "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of wisdom. The waiter nodded again. This time, with determination in his eyes, he promised himself that from that day on, he would never judge a guest by their clothes, their money, or their looks. He would remember this night every time he greeted someone. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted completely. The arrogance that once filled the room had been replaced with humility. The guests returned to their meals, but their eyes still lingered on Keanu with admiration. Some whispered softly, "What a man, so humble. No wonder people love him." The waiter stepped back slowly, still trembling, but now carrying a heavy lesson inside him. He realized that respect is not something we give only to those we think deserve it. It is something we must give to all. Keanu had shown him that true strength is not in mocking or humiliating others, but in lifting them with kindness. That night, the waiter went home a different man. His pride was broken, but his heart was open. He knew he would never forget the calm eyes of Keanu Reeves, the man he insulted, yet the man who gave him grace instead of punishment. It was a lesson carved deep into his soul, and for everyone who had witnessed it, the night was unforgettable. They didn't just see a movie star. They saw a man who used humility as power, who turned an insult into wisdom. The applause, the silence, the whispers, all of it told the same story. A lesson about respect that would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The room was still buzzing after the shocking reveal. The diners could not stop whispering, their voices full of amazement. They had come to eat fine food in a luxurious place, but they had witnessed something far greater. They had seen a lesson unfold before their very eyes. Keanu Reeves, the man they thought was just an ordinary guest, had revealed himself as the owner of the restaurant, and instead of showing anger, he had shown patience and kindness. The waiter stood trembling, his face pale and his pride shattered. He had spent the night throwing insults, mocking the man he thought was beneath him, and now he stood exposed in front of everyone. His voice had broken when he tried to apologize, and his head hung low in shame. No one in the restaurant could forget how cruel he had been, and no one could forget how calmly Keanu had endured it all. Keanu, however, did not raise his voice. He did not humiliate the waiter further. Instead, he looked at him with steady eyes, and then at the rest of the room. His words were calm but carried more weight than the loudest shout. "Respect is free," he said softly. "It costs nothing, yet it is the most valuable thing we can give. Tonight I saw how easily it can be denied, and how deeply it is needed." The silence in the restaurant was heavy, everyone listening closely. The diners nodded, some with guilty expressions because they had laughed earlier at the waiter's cruel jokes. They had judged too, and now they felt ashamed. But Keanu's words gave them more than guilt. They gave them a chance to reflect, to change. The waiter's eyes filled with tears. He whispered again, "I am sorry. I was wrong." His voice shook, but this time it carried sincerity. He knew he had been cruel, and now he understood the weight of his actions. Keanu nodded gently, his calmness like a shield that protected the room from turning into a scene of anger. "Apologies matter," he said, "but only if they lead to change.